Well, that old conversation's raised an ugly head again. The rim brake, disc brake argument, and we've had disc brakes on mountain bikes for years, and you roadies just don't want to embrace new tech. Well, this one guy who seems to be pretty clear that he's a mountain biker fired his cannons across our bow, basically saying, you guys should grow up guys, grow up. Well, let's roll that intro and let's just recap the rim brake, disc brake, mountain bike brake argument once again. Well, the first thing is disc brakes are not equal. The system that's run on a mountain bike is quite different to what's run on a road bike, and it's not just so much the disc brake system, it's how it's integrated into the bike. Now, mountain bikes are significantly more heavier, so weight's not so much of an issue, and they run much bigger discs on those bikes. So they actually have better cooling, and they actually have more leverage on the actual brake disc because the disc is much bigger. And you might think, you know, it doesn't make that much difference, but it actually does. And the other difference is that a mountain bike has active suspension and a road bike does not. The fork or the frame of the fork, the construction of the fork, actually has to have flex built into it. And this is where it compromises the feel and ride of the bike, especially under braking conditions. Whilst on a mountain bike, we have an active suspension that travels up and down, and we have quite a rigid system where the springs and oil work where the brake is mounted to. So these significant differences, even though people might ignore them when they look at the two bikes and go, yeah, but the disc looks the same, the calipers look the same, and they're oil filled and they're hydro. I mean, what's the matter with you roadie guys? The second point that's quite different about a mountain bike compared to a road bike is that you quite often see when someone's using a mountain bike, they pull the brake on and you'll actually see the front wheel will slide to some degree in the dirt. It'll get to a point where the surface or the sand surface or the tension of that surface breaks, and basically what the front wheel does, it pushes the sand, it locks up, pushes the sand along, and you know the sand builds up in front of the wheel and nothing really too much happens there. So the traction or grip between that front tyre and the surface is nowhere near as high as a road tyre on tarmac. So when you're braking, your amount of braking that you can apply on the bike to stop the bike on a mountain bike is far less than what you can use on a road bike. Now, people might say, oh yeah, but you know, we go down hills fast. I'm not saying you don't, but unless you're riding on tarmac with a mountain bike, then you are not going to be able to apply the same force to the front caliper and disc because your interface between your front wheel and the surface that you're riding on has not got the same grip as it does on a road bike on tarmac. So that, even though you may not think that's significant, it actually is, because what we're trying to do, if we're riding a road bike and we're braking actually on the limit, we actually can use more of the force applied to the disc to stop the bike because we've got better traction. In fact, the problem is, or limiting factor with a road bike, is that the back wheel starts to lift. Well, on a mountain bike, the limiting factor is the hardness of the surface that the front wheel's riding on. The other difference between we have with a mountain bike and a road bike is that the wheels are not braced as well as on a mountain bike. Mountain bikes generally have more spokes, so you have more spokes to transfer the braking load, whilst on a road bike, the spokes are usually around about 21. On a mountain bike, usually at least 24 or higher when you're talking about the more high-performance wheels. So the mountain bike actually has more spokes to transfer the braking forces from the disc to the rim than a road bike. And also, the frame and manoeuvring parts on a mountain bike are running free from the frame, whilst with a road bike it's not. The whole flex is through the frame, whilst With a mountain bike, it's not. So when you get any braking on a mountain bike, it's not flexing the frame, it's not affecting the frame at all, because you have suspension. Those pieces are basically through a moment, which is the bearing, through obviously a shock absorber and some suspension, are separated from the frame. And this makes quite a big difference of how the bike reacts and feels when it's under braking. Well, it's starting to come out pretty much that the disc brakes that are being fitted to road bikes are basically inadequate. The problem is the rotors are really too small. The 140 and 160 mil rotors are just not big enough and thin enough to dissipate the heat. And they're getting too hot, and then they start to ting and rub on the pads. Whilst on a mountain bike, you're not using the force or braking system so harsh, and also the discs are much bigger. You have a lot bigger area to dissipate the heat. So these are the major differences. Now, just thinking that the brakes on a road bike have just been basically transplanted onto a road bike is a little bit simplistic, and you need to consider a lot of factors the way a road bike works differently to a mountain bike. Now, they do work. We're not saying they don't work, and for variable weather conditions, if you live especially in the Northern Hemisphere, Northern Europe or Northern America, and you're riding in a lot of poor conditions with rain and that, I mean, disc brakes are a great tool. But if you're talking about disc brakes as far as a performance piece of equipment on the bike, then this is just completely a myth. Now, this is where people say disc brakes have got more power and so on. It's just complete rubbish, because it doesn't matter how much power you have. It's the same when they went to cars and they put power assisted disc brakes on. The car doesn't stop any quicker. All it does is reduce fade. The wheels can still be locked up. The car can still skid. You don't stop the car any quicker. And it's the same with a push bike, but we don't skid on the push bikes. What happens is we have a rotational force of the whole bike. The back wheel starts to lift off the ground. If you keep applying more braking forces, you're going to end up over the handlebars and on the tarmac. So that's the limiting factor. So if saying that they've got more power is meaningless, it doesn't meaningless in a car, and it's meaningless on a bike. Once you've got enough braking to lift the back wheel of the bicycle, you've reached the braking limit. Now, the problem is with disc brakes is that they're going from a very proven system to a much more complicated system, and they're creating different issues on the bike, and they're also making the bikes heavier. And a lot of people go, why do I want to have disc brakes on my bike when my bike's fine? I'm quite happy with the way it brakes and the way it works. Why is the industry forcing me to ride disc brakes? And if people might say no one's forcing you, that's really not true, because I've noticed for at least the last couple of years, you go into a bike shop and there just is very few rim brakes. And if you ask about rim brakes, the bike shops don't really want to get them, or they can't get them, or whatever, but they're encouraging you to buy disc brakes. So there is pressure to move from your old rim brakes to disc brakes, and nothing can be swapped over. You can't take your old wheels, your favourite wheels, and put them on your new bike. And this is what people are upset about. It's not that they're against disc brakes. You know, disc brakes are fine, and they work on gravel bikes and mountain bikes fine, and they even work well on road bikes. But when you're talking about you want to buy a race bike and you want it to be light and you want it to be agile, disc brakes are not really fulfilling that completely. They do to some point, but they're not as agile and light as a rim brake bike. And that's what people are complaining about. It's not that they're saying disc brakes are rubbish. They're saying that disc brakes have not got to where rim brakes were prior to bicycle companies changing over. Well, anyway, guys, that's where I'm going to leave it, and I'll catch you next vid.